All right. Well, while we're letting everyone come in, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Christine Staley. I am the Executive Director of Dyslexia Canada. Dyslexia Canada is a national charity dedicated to ensuring that children with dyslexia have access to fair and equitable education, as well as providing support and services to those impacted. I am very excited to welcome over 100 people from right across Canada to our program today. And we're also streaming live on Facebook, so it's quite exciting for us. Before we dive into the program today, I would just like to encourage everyone to check out our website at dyslexiacanada.org to find out more about dyslexia, gather resources, and find support. And there are also two programs that I just wanted to point out. On June 12th, we will be hosting a workshop for families with illustrator and cartoonist Sarah Jane Vickery. Families can come together and work with Sarah on a fun cartooning project, have the opportunity to ask Sarah questions about her own dyslexia, her artwork, and how she believes that dyslexia molded her path and where she is today. And at the end of the event, we'll even share with you how you can enter in to win a prize. Second, I wanted to point out a new program that Dyslexia Canada is offering called Community Connections. Dyslexia Canada's Community Connections program offers a peer-to-peer support for parents and caregivers of children. We do this all online, and we will provide you with a parent or caregiver who can answer questions for you, can be an ear to listen to, or just to chat with from anywhere in Canada. And with that, I would like to now welcome our board member and moderator for today, Sandra Jack Mallett. Sandra, over to you.
Good afternoon and welcome. We're delighted you're here to join us. My name is Dr. Sandra Jack Mallett. I am a professor in the Department of Education at Cape Breton University, and currently I'm the chair. And I'm the moderator today, and I am delighted to introduce my colleague, Dr. Rob Power. I can just say in the last 2 years, 18 months since COVID, and we've had to pivot to online delivery, we've been very fortunate to have Rob's extensive expertise to guide our department, to guide the university, and provide incredible support to me individually. So Dr. Power is my colleague. He's an assistant professor of education at Cape Breton University. He's also the past president of the International Association for Mobile Learning. He's the president of Power Learning Solutions. With over 2 decades of experience in the education sector, he specializes in instructional design for online and digital learning and educational technology integration. Rob is also the parent of 3 children, one of whom is a teenager living with dyslexia. He has a personal passion for investigating and helping teachers learn about digital accessibility issues and how to leverage and utilize digital tools to support students. So welcome, Rob. Thank you for agreeing. I'm looking forward to moderating and hearing what you have to say, because I always learn tons of stuff. So ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Rob Power.
Thank you very much, Sandra and Christine, for this warm welcome. And it is a pleasure to be here today. And if you'll bear with me for one moment, I'm just going to start sharing my screen because I do have some slides and some resources, and it's just so much easier for me to share my screen and bounce back and forth through a few of the things that I'm going to demonstrate and talk about here today. So bear with me while I get that loaded up. All right, you should be seeing my screen now. So welcome to this presentation on assistive technology and tools for students and adults with dyslexia. And thank you for the introduction. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about myself, since Sandra has already given me a glowing overview and a glowing recommendation. Thank you, Sandra. And Sandra has been a huge help to me and my family as well in getting acclimatized to life at CBU and to just finding resources to help our family and help my daughter who has dyslexia. So thank you, Sandra. I am going to actually start off with a land acknowledgement. Myself and Sandra at Cape Breton University with the Department of Education, we like to recognize that here in Sydney, Cape Breton Island is located in Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules of what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. So thank you for allowing me to give that land acknowledgement before we start on the presentation itself. I'm also going to start off, I said I wasn't going to talk a lot about myself, but I will give just a little bit of background on my perspective when I approach a presentation like this. First and foremost, I come at this not as an academic expert or as a technology specialist. I come at it as a family person, as a father with a wife and 3 children here in the house, 2 of whom have diagnosed learning disabilities, one of those who has been diagnosed with dyslexia. Second, I come at this as an educator, as a teacher with over 2 decades of experience in the sector, a lot of it involving technology use, technology education, technology integration. So I come at it from the perspective of what works for teachers and for students. And then finally, I come at this from the perspective of a technology expert and an instructional design expert when it comes to technology integration. So I like to view this from a bit of a pragmatic level up, from personal needs, helping family and helping my students and my colleagues with the use of technology, and then from the more theoretical perspectives and the more technology-based perspectives of the tools that we use themselves. I also like to view the use of technology to help students who are living with disabilities not as a remediation. And I like to encourage my educational technology students to strike that notion from their minds as well. Whenever we talk about digital accessibility issues, I tell them to stop thinking about the disabilities first, stop thinking about the remediation of a problem first, and simply start thinking about offering broader ranges of resources and tools for all of our students. Menus of options that follow what we call universal design for learning principles, and that follow all of the standards that different organizations, including the World Wide Web Consortium and different provincial regimes like the AODA legislation and what is followed in other provinces, to make sure that they're all covered, but to make sure that we're simply providing as many options as possible for our students and our colleagues to access the learning experiences, by which point there shouldn't be a problem to remediate, because by covering these principles and using technology tools that are at our disposal effectively, we're making sure those problems, those barriers don't exist to begin with. So we're actually changing the landscape. Instead of addressing problems, we're making sure they don't occur in the first place. So what are we going to look at in this presentation today? Looking at tools for adults and students living with struggling with dyslexia in their day-to-day lives. We're going to look at 2 types: tools for consumption and tools for production of written material. When it comes to the tools for consumption, we're going to look at some examples of tools that we could use for ear reading. We'll look at some tools that could be used to help us with visual reading, and then we'll spend some time looking at tools that we can use to help us with the production of our written materials. I'm going to start off looking at a few examples of tools that are useful for ear reading, and I will point out that quick note that I have on the bottom of the slide there. Ear reading, a book or any resource, is reading. Don't let anybody tell you that it's not reading. It can be every bit as effective as visual reading when it comes to comprehending material and to learning how to master other forms of reading. It can improve your comprehension of key points through just being able to hear it when you can't visually interpret the words. Also gives you the benefit for all of your students of multimodal reception of content. Not going to get into too much about that. But it does help to also improve your overall silent reading ability, your visual reading ability. So visual reading is a very good tool that we have at our disposal. And there are lots of tools that we can use to enable us to engage in visual reading. One of the more readily recognizable is the idea of audiobooks, and there are lots of places you can find audiobooks. I'm not going to give a demonstration of a formal audiobook platform here today, but you can find them anywhere from dedicated audiobooks for students who do have disabilities from organizations such as CELA, to more commercially available ones such as Audible or Kobo, which you can get through Chapters in Indigo, or Kindle readers have audiobooks available to them. And I do have a list at the end of this slide deck, and I've provided it in a PDF document as well that Christine can share with everybody later on, where I do have some of these tools listed with links to them. If you're not looking at dedicated audiobooks, there are tools that we can use to transform any written document into something that we can use for ear reading. One of the more popular we've heard bandied about, the name bandied about lately, is a tool called Google Read and Write. Very good tool, but it's not free. A lot of our younger students who are working with Chromebooks and working with Google Classroom in this age of online education because of the pandemic may already have access to Read and Write. A lot of us don't. It is subscription based, but there are some cool and useful tools that we can use that are built into Microsoft Office Suite, that are built into Google Docs, and that we can get as add-ons, whether we're using Apple computers or Android devices or Windows. I'm going to take a look now at one of those tools, which is built into Office, which is the ReadAloud tool, and it integrates into the immersive reader tool that, that Office has. So I'm just going to minimize my slide here for a moment, and I'm going to bring up a Word document. This is a sample document I use for a lot of demonstrations. It's a paper that I wrote several years ago, and I'm going to show you how the ReadAloud tool can transform this into a document that I can use for ear reading. So I do believe that that tool it's hidden by my toolbar here right now. I believe it is under View, Review. It's under Review. So I have a tool here called ReadAloud. And when I click on this, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger for everyone to see. When I click on ReadAloud,
We can't hear it, Rob.
my apologies. Apparently you can't hear that actually reading it out to you, but you can see it was highlighting the words. It's reading it out to me in a bit of a robotic voice. I'm not sure if I'm actually going to be able to share the audio with you. I know, Sandra, in Teams, we can click on an option to share the audio in Zoom, but I don't know that I can here in Zoom itself. But it reads the text of the screen out to me, and you can see that the words are highlighted, which has a double benefit because it will help me with my mastery of visual reading at the same time that I'm hearing it read out to me and I'm using my ear reading, so I can follow along with that.
And you can adjust the speed, Rob, as well.
You can adjust the speed. I haven't played around with that, but yes, you can adjust the speed, and hopefully you can adjust the voice a bit too, because
Yes,
that
you can
was a
adjust the
little bit
speed and the
robotic.
voices. Yes.
Now I have, there's a similar tool that is built into Google Docs. So I have this one here. I would need to activate an extension on my browser to have this one read out to me. And I do have an extension available. Just need to minimize this here because again, my Zoom toolbar is in the way. I have a screen reader application here called ChromeVox. It's free. You can add it to Chrome. When you do that, I won't do that now just for the sake of time, but it does basically the exact same thing that ReadAloud does for you in Word, and it would then read out this document to me. So it doesn't matter if you're using Microsoft Word, if you're using Google Docs, you can get screen reader applications that will read it out to you that are free or that are relatively cheap. And I do have some others listed on my slides, my slide deck here as well.
Rob, there was a question. Can these readers read PDFs?
Yes, usually they can. Now the ReadAloud that's in Office 365 obviously isn't going to read a PDF because that's part of Adobe. But you can get ones that you can install on your computer like NVDA, or you can get paid ones like JAWS. You can also get accessibility tools that are built right into Windows that you can turn on and they will read the screen for you. You can do the same with your Android device. I'm assuming you can do the same with your iPhone. You can turn on the accessibility features and it will read any written content out to you. As long as it's not like a scanned PDF, like you take a photocopy and scan it in, which is really just a picture. If it's a true PDF document, if you can highlight the text on the page and copy paste it, then it will work for you.
Thank you.
I do have another tool here that I do want to demonstrate for you, though, that is quite useful for ear reading, and it's called Office Lens. You can get, you used to be able to get it for Windows. They don't provide that one anymore, but I do have it installed on my phone. And what this tool is useful for, it will take any written text that you have. It could be on your computer screen. It could be a poster you see in your classroom or notes that your instructor writes on their board, and it will turn it into a readable document for you. So I'm just going to minimize this slide for a moment, and I'm going to show you how this tool works. So bear with me. I have another window open here that will show you my phone screen. All right, so I am going to cast my phone screen here now to this. Okay, so we are seeing no shared content. There we go. So I have a document on my bulletin board here right next to me. It's a printout of the slide with the land acknowledgement on it. So if I turn on my Microsoft Lens app and I point it at this document, it will allow me to take a picture of it, and then I can just crop in on the document, confirm that, hit done, and now it will allow me to use Immersive Reader on my phone to read that document or that poster that I just took a picture of. So I turn that on. You're probably not going to hear this. It takes a moment to read the text. And now I can press play. I've played around with this one over the weekend. It's quite the useful tool. It is free and it works with a lot of different written documents. I've tried it with some handwritten ones as well. Picks up some of my words, some not, because I have very horrible handwriting. My wife always loves to chastise me on that. But a printed document or a poster like that, or a sign that you see in a business or out in public, should be able to read that for you fairly easily, and it gives you the highlighted words and reads it out so that you can hear it. So that is called Office Lens. And again, I have a link to that and the full citation for that at the end of this slide deck. So if anybody wants to find that tool later on, it should be easy for you to find. So let's take a look at a few tools for visual reading. There do seem to be a lot more tools out there that will help you with ear reading than there are with visual reading. Lots of tools that will read stuff out to you, that will produce audio content for you. When it comes to visual reading, the tools are a little bit more limited in scope. We have ones that deal with the actual presentation of the content on the page itself, mostly with the stylings of the page and with the fonts. And we have the ability to change the color of our screen or to put some kind of color overlay over a document, which, while there's not a lot of research out there describing how effective these actually are in terms of statistical effectiveness with reading ability, there's a lot of evidence from users of these tools that they do find it useful for them and that it does help them with their reading. So there's a couple of different fonts out there that some people find useful. One's called OpenDyslexic, and I will show you that in a second. The Dyslexia font is not free, but the OpenDyslexic one is. And there's another one here called Dyslexia Reader Chrome, which will convert any of your pages that you're looking at in your Chrome browser into something that's more friendly in terms of its styling and its fonts. So I'll show you what the OpenDyslexic font looks like in a moment. I'll also show you what a color overlay tool can look like and how helpful that can be. The color overlay tools, you can get digital ones. You can also just get sheets of colored plastic that you can put right over your screen or right over a document. So there's lots of different ways to use that. So the OpenDyslexic font, this is what that font looks like. This is a free font that you can download. I do have the link to it on this page, as well as at the end of this slide deck. So you can download that, and then you can use it in your Word documents, in your PowerPoint presentations, wherever you want. A lot of people do say that they find this font is much easier for reading. It gives them visual cues to help them with the orientation of the words and help prevent any misinterpretation of the presentation of letters and syllables and things like that on the page. And when it comes to the actual color overlay, I will open that up for you here now. Do I have it turned on already on my page? No, I don't. Okay. So I'm going to turn on Color Veil. This is a free one that I have. I'll turn it on. You can see it puts a colored layer over my screen. I can adjust how much opacity it has. I can change the color. And there's anecdotal evidence as well that some dyslexic readers find this quite helpful to them in reading the content that's on the page. So two main types of tools that we have available to us for visual reading: changing the font and the appearance of the page, and changing the actual page color itself, putting something over it to change the lighting and how our eyes are receiving that information. I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at a few different tools that we have available to us to help with the production of content. Consuming content is not all that we have to do in our lives as adults or as young adult students. We have to produce documents as well. And sometimes that might be difficult depending on the issues that we're dealing with. Dyslexia would be no different. So some of the tools that we have available to us to help with that, we have speech-to-text applications. We've already looked at text-to-speech applications for ear reading. A lot of these applications work the other way around and will listen to us and produce words based on what we're speaking. Again, Google Read and Write is a common one for this. Immersive Reader can help with that. Microsoft Office has one built in called Dictate. And I also have a web-based one that I can show you called dictate.io. There's another one that's built into Google Docs as well. It's very similar to the Office Dictate. Once we've written words, oftentimes we find that we need to edit what we have written to make sure that it actually makes sense, that we haven't jumbled things up, that we haven't misspelled things. Lots of tools already built into Office Suite, to Google Docs that will help us with that. The editor tools such as the spelling and grammar checker built into Word can help. Similar tools are built into Google Docs. Grammarly is another powerful tool, but that's not necessarily free. Whereas if we're already using Office or Google Docs, it's built right in. And I'll take a moment after that to talk about some other things that we can do, whether or not we have dyslexia ourselves, things that we can do when we're producing content just to make it a little bit easier for everybody to engage with our content. And some of those are related to basic digital accessibility standards when we're constructing our documents. So I'll show you what the Office Dictate looks like. And I'll show you the dictate.io voice dictation tool, which is web-based. And you can use that, by the way, with your mobile phone, not just with your web browser on your laptop or your computer. And then I'll show you some of these basic editing tools here before I talk a little bit more about the digital accessibility standards. So I do have a blank Word document ready here, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when you're using the Office Dictate. So that one is not under review. I think it's under view. Which tool did they hide this one under? I don't suppose you remember offhand which one this is under, do you, Sandra?
No. Why don't you just put it in
There
the
we go.
search
It's
bar?
right on the home tab.
Uh,
So the immersive reader is built in under review, but the dictate is built right in on the toolbar here. So I click on this one. It's now listening to me, and it's typing out what I'm saying. And it's gotten a lot better in recent years at actually understanding your text. The big trick to this is that you need to train yourself to speak to it. I hail from Newfoundland. I tend to speak really quickly. I already have to force myself to slow down when I'm giving a presentation or presenting live to a class. So I'd have to do the same thing here just to practice so that it's picking up my words accurately. But you can see it's clipping along at a pretty good pace there and picking this up. And I can check what I have written. Sometimes I might not be able to see the forest through the trees, the typos that I have here on the page or the context of what I've written. I can then switch back to my review tab, click on the read aloud, and it will read out what I've written to me. So I've got a way that I can speak and type the text without having to physically type it up or use a pen and pencil to write. And I've got a way to ear read it back to me to make sure that it has actually typed in correctly what I've asked it to type in for me. So very useful tool in that respect. You might just have to do some polishing up on it afterwards. And again, those tools are under the editor in Microsoft Office. So it gives me suggestions on spelling and on grammar in here, on clarity. I can work my way through this, do a full spell check. I can work my way through the grammar on that, make sure that it all makes sense. A lot of us are already quite familiar with using the grammar and spell checker that's built into Microsoft Word, so I won't dwell on that. Similar tools built into Google Docs. Now I have another tool open here in my browser called Voice Dictation. This is a free tool that will actually interpret what you're saying in multiple different languages. So I'm going to launch this tool, and it's going to give me a blank page. And I can select my language here. I can also select different voices, I do believe. So if I want to start typing on this, I can start typing here now, and it's going to listen to what I'm saying. And it does take a little bit more time to record the text for me. So now you can see it has done that. I've used it on a browser. I can do this using my phone, so I don't need to be home at my computer with Microsoft Office. I can actually dictate notes to myself that will then be put in writing. And I can export this text. I can copy it. I can put it into my Word document later on. I can put it into an email if I want, copy paste it into an email. So I've got this here. I can come back to my, my email application, and I could start a new email here to Sandra. And I could paste this text in there. So I could actually speak it that way. Now, this is part of Office Suite, so it does have Dictate built in. But on my phone, I don't necessarily have access to Office Dictate when I'm using the email app on my phone. So I could use that. I could copy paste the text over or put it into a social media post. So another tool that's quite useful when it comes to producing your documents. So what about those digital accessibility standards that I mentioned a moment ago? How do they come into play? Well, I will take a quick look here at some of the basics that we need to keep in mind producing any document. One of those is how you structure your document to make sure that it makes sense and that when you're using screen reader applications, that it reads it back properly to you. And that's adding proper heading structure to things as you're writing them. You also want to take into consideration when you're using images and the impact that that's going to have on any reader of your document. And you want to consider the colors that you're using for your fonts. So I am going to just come back to my blank Word document here that I had typed in as I was using Dictate. I'm going to put in a heading here for it. This is a sample document. And I'm going to put an image in this here. So I'll actually take this image Actually, I'll take this one because it'll be easier to see on that Word document, and I'll paste it in here. If I want a screen reader application to read this out properly to anyone, the same way that an audiobook would be read out, I need to structure this so that the application can interpret what's a title or a heading and what's the main text. If I don't, and somebody who's using a screen reader comes back to this, if it's a long document, they have to get the screen reader to read the entire document to them until they find the point where they left off. If I properly structure this and add in headings, then they'll be able to navigate that and go from heading to heading. And that's quite easy to do. I just take my heading, I go to my home tab, I pick one of my styles up here, and I can give this a title or heading 1, heading 2. So I'll give this a title so that it picks it up as the title of the document. You should do the same thing when you're creating PowerPoint slides. You can do the same thing with Google Docs as well. If I wanted a subheading in here, I could put one here. And instead of just making it bold and making it big and making it look pretty, I want to actually tag it. So I would find heading 1 in here and I would tag it. This brings me to the point about the color for your fonts. Never or always try to avoid using color for your text when you're creating a document. For a reader who has a visual issue, a visual impairment, that color is going to be meaningless to them. And it's going to be meaningless to anyone who has a complete impairment and is using a screen reader. You want to make sure that you stick with the highest color contrast ratio possible. So black on white. It's going to make it much easier to read. Otherwise, you get into a situation like this where you have light colors on a light colored background or dark colors on a dark colored background, and visually it's going to be very difficult to read. We call that the color contrast ratio. You want to keep the ratio as high as possible, which means sticking to the black on white. Also try and stick, when you're creating web-based documents, web pages for your students, something in a learning management system, stick to the default fonts. Don't pick a new font. Don't hard code it with a font. That way, if I am using an application like Chrome Dyslexia, it can automatically translate this into OpenDyslexic font for me, as opposed to it being stuck in Calibri or Arial or whatever font the author of the document decided they wanted it in. And the final point that I wanted to make about authoring documents here that we should consider is when we add in an image, make sure you add something called alt text to it. If you're using Immersive Reader, if you're using any screen reader application and you get to an image, it's going to read that alternate text to you so that if you do have a visual impairment, you'll know what the image is about. Easy enough to do in Word. I can just right click this, edit the alt text. And you can see this one has alt text built in already because I put the alt text in it before I copy pasted it over from PowerPoint. But if you don't, a lot of times it'll just have the file name of the image there, which is meaningless. So if I'm using a screen reader application like JAWS or NVDA, and I get to this image, it's going to read this text to me when I get to the image, and I'm not losing anything. So when you're creating your documents, lots of tools that you can use that will let the computer record what you're speaking to it. Lots of tools that will let you listen back to what you've written to make sure it's accurate, and that will let you edit the spelling of it and the grammar to make sure it makes sense. You want to make sure that you properly tag your structure so your document actually flows. Make sure that you're careful with the colors you use. And if you're using images, don't put too much text inside that image because a screen reader can't read it, a visually impaired reader can't read it, and make sure you add that alt text to it. Other than that, how are we doing on time with our presentations here?
We're good. We're right on. We're good, Rob. We're in good shape.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I do have all of these resources listed here in the slide deck by type. So if anybody wants to get one of those resources later on, other than that, I guess we probably have some time for some questions.
One of the things that I would just like to share too is Rob talked about a pathway for our students using the voice to speech. So we're trying to also all the way along to encourage independence. So once the child knows or the student knows how to use the voice to speech, you can get that in place, and then teach the child how to use the read aloud, because oftentimes even if they type in a mistake, they will subsequently hear the mistake. So get those two in place as a process for a young person who's writing, and they can do that on their own. And then the third piece that we can add on to that an option that Word has, is show readability statistics. So if you have a kid in 8th grade who goes through the first 2 steps of the process and then says, okay, I'm ready for you to look at it, and the child hasn't used the readability statistics, and when they start using it, they see that it's written at approximately a grade 2 level, and we're aiming for a grade 8 level. It's a really good third step in the process. So the child goes back again with that notion of independence and realizes it has to use more complex sentence, more complex vocabulary, different sentence types. So I really like that 3-step process for kids who are struggling to get their ideas down on paper: voice to text, then listen to the read aloud, make the corrections on the go, and then use that readability statistics, and to get a sense of what they'll know what grade they're in and what grade they're writing at.
And Sandra, we've actually had a couple more questions. So I'm actually just going to read a couple of these off. They've come in from other sources now. So just looking at our chat, the first one, should I recommend my school look into Google Read and Write? We are currently just using Google Docs, dictate and read. What makes it better?
That is a good question, and I'm not even going to pretend to be able to answer that. I would assume that Google Read and Write has more functionality than just the basic dictate and read, that it's actually catered to helping you improve your reading ability, whereas the dictate and read are simply the functions: turn on the microphone and turn on the speaker. That's about all that I can really say on that right now, without doing further investigation into it myself.
I think Rob makes the point that there are more features embedded. However, sometimes it's just good to give the kid the basics, like just lay out the process and let the youngster have a go at it, and let the youngster have multiple times to practice whatever that agreed upon pathway is. So the child gets, it's not just playing with the technology, but the child starts to understand, this is the process that works for me, whatever that looks like. I just made one recommendation, but this is what works for me, and I can start counting on this in the classroom. I can start counting on this at home when I'm doing work. Not that it can't be added to or deleted from, it certainly can, but we want to start getting a sense of what works for me, what is the best fit for this technology for myself as an individual.
And there's one other question that came in here. I have a hard time filling out government forms. Are there tools that you would recommend?
I understand where you're coming from on that, and that's one of the first things that that I encountered when the first time that I took a course on producing digitally accessible documents, is the structure of forms and how inaccessible a lot of them can be. Dedicated screen reader applications such as NVDA or JAWS can really help you with that. I'm sure Read and Write can be helpful with that as well too. The key is that it allows you to navigate the document. It just doesn't read it out to you straight back word for word. You want to be able to have that navigation using your keyboard so that you can move from section to section, and it will read the label to you and then tell you that you can now enter your text. That's one of the keys that you want to look for in that. So if you're looking for a relatively inexpensive option, I would say the Chromevox option that I mentioned, or the NVDA, which are applications you can install that are dedicated screen readers. They're not just tools that are built into, say, Word, like ReadAloud, that will read a Word document. They'll read anything that you have open. NVDA will. It will read your menus in Windows. It will read your PowerPoints. It will read your social media posts that you're looking at, and it will help you read those forms, those PDF forms, and fill those out as well. And we'll give you some really good alerts when you get to something that requires action on your part.
Are there any other questions?
I think we have 2 questions that have come in through the Q&A box, Sandra.
Oh, okay. So we answered the one about the Google. Yes, the website, Rob's presentation will be made available on the Dyslexia Canada website. Yes, the government forms one. Sorry, Christine, I don't see any other ones.
Oh, I will pull them up here. You might not be able to see them. So some people with dyslexia express a preference for information, including instructions, to be communicated through video. Is video part of an accessible online content strategy?
Absolutely it is. Like I was saying at the beginning of my presentation, the idea is to provide a range of options, a menu of options for all of your students. Video is a very good way to provide instructional content, whether that be instructions or overviews of key concepts. You just want to make sure, and I could do an entire webinar for an hour or 2 hours or more just on creating instructional videos and the principles of them. But you want to make sure that they're short and sweet, basically, because you can get lost in a longer video. And you want to make sure that you have good usable subtitles or closed captions available with them. So that way any visually impaired user or anyone who can't turn on their speaker for that matter is able to read what's being spoken on the screen. But the benefit of using a video, I would assume for somebody who has a reading-based learning disability, somebody who struggles with reading the written words with instructions, the benefit of a video is that, Christine, if you were explaining to me how to do a math problem or how to edit my essay, I can see your expressions just the same as if you were here in person with me. So I'm getting more than just the spoken word. I'm getting those visual cues. I'm getting the intonation behind it. So video is very powerful for that. Just make sure that when you're creating your video, you keep all users in mind and that you have closed captions for it. YouTube is very good now at automatically adding captions, but I'd still say it's only about 80–85% accurate. And I really had a nightmare time after a webinar a couple of weeks ago when I was creating the closed captions afterwards. It was an hour-long webinar, and some of the automatically translated speech to text was what I would deem NSFW, not suitable for work, or might be offensive to some of my potential audience. So you want to check it before you publish it. And if you're finding an instructional video, let's say, I'll give you an example of one that I gave to my students recently about Gagne's 9 events of instruction. Well, I'm not going to record that when Gagne himself has put up a video about that. So if I find a video by Gagne about it, I want to actually view the whole thing with the closed captions on and read them and make sure it's not just automated and that there's no errors in it. Because if you're dealing with a student who has trouble already reading the written word, and they're hearing you speak it, and they're practicing strategies you've given them about matching up the words that they see on the screen to what they hear spoken, and then there's errors in that transcript, that's going to cause problems. So yeah, videos, great way for providing instructions and helping your students understand content, but make sure that you take that extra step with the captions.
Thank you, Rob. There's another question here. Is there a good resource that helps families or students learn how to use programs in an easily consumable way?
That, I would assume, depends on the individual program. Most of these applications do have tutorials on, like Microsoft Office has tutorials on and videos on their support website that shows you how to use these tools. There's also all kinds of video tutorials that are available on YouTube that will show you how to use the basics. 2–3 minute videos that show you how to do a specific step or how to do a specific thing. Sometimes they're a little bit easier than going to the formal website of the publisher of the tool and following their whole tutorial, which a lot of it you might already know. So sometimes those videos can be helpful for that, but there's lots of resources out there that will show you a few steps. And I find probably the best is just to do a quick Google search or a YouTube search and find a video that shows you. Maybe I don't need to know how to use all the accessibility tools built into Word. I just want to know how to turn on the Office Dictate. A 30-second video will show me that, and I don't have to sift through 10, 20 pages of Word overview documents.
I think that one of the cautions too is it can become overwhelming because there's so many things available. And so that whole idea about trying to find a process, starting with one piece of the technology and building up some confidence for yourself or for your young person, building up some confidence in terms of navigation with that piece of technology, and then going to the next one. And while YouTube is my favorite, how do I, and the more explicit I am in the how do I, usually I'll get a hit right off. But it is overwhelming, so start with one. The other question
you're absolutely right there, Sandra, and I would like to point out, this is something that I always advise my students or my colleagues when I'm showing them how to do a few tricks with technology, is don't try and learn it all. Don't try and learn everything about Google Read and Write. Figure out what it is that you're trying to do right now, or what your child needs to do right now with the tool, and practice using that.
Yes.
Then when you get a little more advanced and you need to learn something else, learn that when you need it. If you try to learn the entire suite, you'll never remember everything. Like, I use a tool called Screencast-O-Matic to record my instructional videos. I don't even know half of what I can do with that tool because I've never needed it, so I haven't practiced it.
Thank you, Rob. So we have an interesting question here. A student would like to learn how to read the text in chat in video games. Is there something to help with that?
Read the text and chat in video games. That I can't answer offhand.
Okay, we can get back on that one.
Yeah, I'm assuming that a screen reader application like NVDA, if you're playing the game online, will read it out to you.
Okay.
And a lot of games, I know from using, say, Second Life, I know that's not a game, but I've used that to demonstrate it to some of my students before. There are options where you can turn on your speakers to read the chat text to you. I'm assuming that there are in some of these games as well, but it might be different from game to game. So it's kind of a hard question to answer.
Okay, Rob, we'd like to take a question from those listening on Facebook. The query is, I find the font OpenDyslexic helpful. However, I cannot get it on Chrome. I can get it on Chrome, excuse me. I can get it on Chrome, but not on many other search engines or on my Apple products. Any tips?
Tips for getting it on Apple? No. I don't know if there's a separate one that's available for Apple. I know OpenDyslexic, I only installed it myself this weekend just to play around with it. And it was free. I used Chrome on my laptop. I was able to download it. You open up the file and then there's a link there to install it on your computer. So now it'll work with any application that's on my computer. I can use that font.
Okay.
Not sure about with Android or iOS. I haven't tried yet. Okay.
Thank you, Rob. And then we have a question. As a parent, am I doing my child who is dyslexic with read, a disservice by pushing her to learn to read instead of doing text to talk, etc.?
I am not a researcher specializing in dyslexia and in that particular learning disability, so I would defer to the experts on this one.
Okay, well, I'm not an expert, but this is the area that I research in. In the best case scenario, we want our students to be eye readers. That's the best case scenario for kids. And Rob said earlier, ear reading, that's a wonderful opportunity for kids to hear syntax, for kids to have vocabulary development, kids who are struggling to read, to help them fall asleep at night. But the ultimate goal is to get our kids to be able to be eye readers. However, having said that, some children are living with profound dyslexia and have had like years of intervening good tutoring. and are still struggling. At some point, a decision can be made for the child to do more ear reading than eye reading. We don't want to frustrate our children. And we know that the cognitive load for a kid who's living with dyslexia to keep up to the volume of reading at school is a lot. So sometimes we can say if the kid had to read 3 pages, let's read 1 chapter with our eyes, and let's use the technology to read the other couple of pages. Otherwise, the sheer volume of time is going to overtake you, and the kid's going to feel a bit overwhelmed. So thank you for the questions, and thank you, Rob. I'm going to pass back to Christine.
Perfect. I actually have one more question that just came in from Facebook that I'd like to ask. We have a few more minutes, so I want to try to get as many in. So the question from Facebook was, do any assistive reading programs work better than others when it comes to translating calculations in math and science?
I'm afraid that I can't answer that because I've never actually looked at them. But Sandra, that's a good question that you and I should write down to have a look at, because I do plan on looking at that in a little more depth. But I'm sure that you can probably find an answer to that question on Google from actual users of the applications.
So I know that in Ontario, the province of Ontario, oftentimes a child with a diagnosed learning disability, the child's given access to a laptop and Kurzweil, which is a program, an assistive technology program, sort of the Rolls Royce of the assistive technology all in one. And it does quite nicely with mathematics and scientific notation and that type of stuff. If your child happens to be in Ontario and happens to have had that offered as part of their plan.
And I just noticed that Anne wrote in the chat there the name of another program called Equatio, which reads aloud digital math. It's a text help product. So another one worth looking into. Thank you, Anne.
Look that one up.
Perfect. Thank you. And just so everyone that's watching knows, I have been gathering, a lot of people have been putting suggestions of various tools that they've used. So I've been taking note of all of those, and I will gather them all up and provide those to everyone. I'd also like to encourage all of our listeners to check out the Dyslexia Canada website. We do have a page dedicated to assistive technology tools, but we're always looking for suggestions of other tools that people find helpful, and we can add to that page to benefit everyone. So with that, I would like to thank everyone who joined us today for coming along and listening to our presentation. We have recorded this session, and we will be providing it and posting it on our website afterwards. And also, as Rob mentioned, we will be providing the PowerPoint presentation along with all of the resources that he has given up on the website. So you can go back and take a look at all of the tools that he mentioned. Plus, there are many, many more there. So take your time and check them out. I would also like to thank Rob for joining us today. This is the second presentation he's done for us, and they're always extremely informative, and they provide so much value to our audience. So thank you very much for doing this for us again, Rob.
Thank you, Christine. My pleasure.
Perfect. And last but not least, thank you very much, Sandra, for moderating this session. We've been keeping Sandra on the go the last couple of weeks. She just finished a webinar for us on helping pre-readers learn to read and helping with those foundational skills. And we pulled her back in to moderate this. So thank you very much for that.
Pleasure.
And last, go back to our website and please sign up for our upcoming workshop on June 12th with Sarah Jane Vickery, and check out all of the other resources that we have on dyslexiacanada.org. And with that, thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a fantastic rest of your day.